The day I decided to surprise my husband at his office was the day my entire life quietly cracked open. I remember standing in front of that glass building downtown, holding a small paper bag with his favorite lunch inside, thinking I was about to do something sweet. Something normal, something a wife does after 40 years of marriage when she feels the distance growing between her and the man she once knew better than anyone else. But I had no idea that within the next hour I would be standing in a quiet hallway, staring at a wall that wasn't supposed to exist, and discovering something behind it that would make me question everything about my husband, my marriage, and the life we had built together. Before I tell you what happened, let me ask you something. Have you ever felt that strange moment when your instincts whisper that something is wrong, but everyone around you insists everything is fine? If you enjoy stories like this and want to follow what happens next, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Now let me tell you how that ordinary afternoon turned into the beginning of the most frightening discovery of my life. My name is Alina Brooks. I am 67 years old, and before I retired, I spent more than 30 years working as a financial compliance investigator. My entire career revolved around finding hidden fraud, uncovering secrets inside corporations, and reading the small details most people overlook. That skill helped me expose millions of dollars in financial corruption during my career. But strangely enough, it never prepared me to uncover the secret hiding inside my own marriage. My husband, Michael Brooks, who is 62, is a senior executive at a large corporate firm downtown. Michael has always been charming, polished, and admired by everyone around him. For decades, people described him as the kind of man who could walk into a room and immediately make people trust him. I used to feel proud hearing that. But over the last year, something about him had started to change. Small things at first, late nights at the office, phone calls he suddenly stopped taking in front of me, conversations that ended the moment I entered the room. At first, I told myself it was stress. Corporate life is demanding, and Michael had always carried a lot of responsibility. But the strange feeling inside my chest kept growing. And when you spend your life investigating deception, your instincts eventually start asking uncomfortable questions. That morning, I woke up with a simple idea. I would visit his office unexpectedly, nothing dramatic. Just bring him lunch, surprise him, remind him that we were still the same couple who used to meet for coffee in the middle of the workday. I remember even laughing to myself while I packed the lunch bag. Imagine his face when he sees me walk into the office, I thought. I had no idea that the surprise would not belong to him. It would belong to me. The building where Michael works is a modern steel and glass tower in the center of the city. When I stepped through the front doors, the cool air from the lobby hit my face, and I felt a strange, nervous energy I couldn't explain. The security guard recognized me immediately. After so many years of attending company events with Michael, most of the staff knew who I was. "Mrs. Brooks, good afternoon," he said politely. "Mr. Brooks is on the executive floor." I smiled and thanked him, trying to act casual. The elevator ride felt longer than usual. When the doors opened onto the executive level, the hallway was quiet. Too quiet for a weekday afternoon. The carpet softened my footsteps as I walked toward Michael's office, holding the lunch bag like it was the most normal thing in the world. That was when I saw Linda Harper. Linda is 55 and has worked as the office manager on that floor for nearly 2 decades. She knows everything that happens in that office. Every meeting, every visitor, every confidential document that passes through those rooms. She has always been polite to me, but something about her expression that day felt tense. "Mrs. Brooks," she said quickly when she noticed me, "I didn't know you were coming today. I thought I would surprise Michael," I told her with a friendly smile. "Is he in his office?" Linda hesitated, just for a second. But when you spend decades watching people during interviews and investigations, you learn that the smallest hesitation can say more than a full conversation. "He stepped out for a meeting," she replied. "He should be back soon." That answer felt strange. Michael's calendar was usually planned down to the minute, but I nodded and told her I would wait. Linda offered to bring me coffee, and while she walked away, I decided to take a short walk down the hallway. That was when something odd caught my attention. At the far end of the executive corridor, there was a decorative wall panel. A large wooden structure designed to hide electrical wiring and ventilation systems. But as I walked past it, I felt something unusual. a faint vibration under the floor. At first I thought it was the building's ventilation system. But then I noticed something else. A thin line of cool air brushing across my ankle, coming from behind the wall. I stopped walking. Most people would have ignored it, but remember what I told you about my career. When you spend 30 years uncovering hidden things, curiosity becomes impossible to turn off. I crouched slightly and looked closer at the panel. The edge of the wooden frame looked newer than the surrounding walls. Like it had been opened recently. That's when I heard a faint sound. A sound so quiet that most people would have missed it completely. It sounded like movement. My heart began to beat faster. I stood up slowly and looked down the empty hallway. Linda was still at the other end of the office preparing coffee, and in that moment a strange thought crossed my mind. If this panel had been installed recently, why hadn't Michael mentioned it? I walked back toward Linda's desk. Linda, I asked casually, has there been construction work on this floor recently? She looked up quickly, too quickly. Just minor maintenance, she said. Why do you ask? I pointed toward the decorative panel. That wall seems different. For a moment she didn't answer. Then she forced a polite smile. Oh, just ventilation work. Something about the way she said it made the warning bells in my mind ring louder. I thanked her and returned to the hallway, pretending to simply stretch my legs while waiting for Michael. But inside my mind, a quiet suspicion was forming. And that suspicion led me to the next person I encountered that afternoon. Carlos Ramirez. Carlos is the building maintenance supervisor, a 60-year-old man who has worked in that tower for over 25 years. He knows every pipe, every hallway, and every maintenance corridor inside that building. When he saw me examining the wall, he walked over politely. Everything okay, Mrs. Brooks? He asked. I gestured toward the panel. Carlos, has this wall been opened recently? He looked at it for a few seconds, frowning slightly. Not that I know of. Then he leaned closer, running his hand along the wooden frame. His expression slowly changed. That's strange, he muttered. What is it? I asked quietly. Carlos tapped lightly on the wood. The sound that came back wasn't the solid echo of a normal wall. It was hollow, completely hollow. He looked at me again, confusion spreading across his face. This shouldn't be empty, he said slowly. There's no maintenance shaft here according to the building plans. A cold feeling began spreading through my chest. Then what's behind it? I asked. Carlos hesitated before answering. There's only one way to find out. He reached for a small tool from his belt and carefully loosened the edge of the panel. The wood shifted slightly, just enough to reveal a narrow, dark gap behind it. And from that gap I heard the sound again. A quiet movement, like someone breathing. My heart stopped. Because in that moment, standing in the silent hallway outside my husband's office, I realized something impossible. There was someone behind that wall. And whatever Michael Brooks had been hiding inside his office building, I was about to discover it. I will never forget the moment that wall finally moved. 1 second I was standing in a quiet hallway outside my husband's office, watching a building maintenance supervisor pry open a decorative panel that shouldn't have been hollow, and the next second I was staring into darkness that was never meant to be discovered. Carlos Ramirez, the building maintenance supervisor who had worked in that tower for more than 25 years, gently pulled the panel outward. The wood shifted just a few inches at first, and the sound it made echoed strangely through the corridor. My heart was beating so loudly I could hear it in my ears. And then the panel slid open far enough for both of us to see inside. What we saw in that narrow space made the air in my lungs freeze. It wasn't empty. There was a hidden passage behind the wall, a narrow corridor barely wide enough for a person to stand in. And standing there in the dim shadow was a girl. For a few seconds none of us moved. The girl looked just as shocked as we were. Her eyes widened in fear as the light from the hallway spilled into the secret space. She looked pale, exhausted, and terrified. I could see immediately that she was young, maybe 19 or 20 at most. Her dark hair was messy, and she looked like someone who had been hiding for a very long time. Carlos took a step back in disbelief. Madre de Dios, he whispered quietly, but my mind was racing much faster than shock. When you spend 30 years investigating fraud and deception, your brain starts analyzing a situation before your emotions can even catch up. Why was there a hidden corridor behind my husband's office wall? Why was a young woman hiding inside it? And most importantly, why did she look so afraid of being seen? I raised my hands slowly so I wouldn't scare her. It's okay, I said softly. You're safe. We're not going to hurt you. The girl didn't answer immediately. Her eyes moved quickly between me and Carlos like she was trying to decide whether she could trust us. Finally, she stepped forward slightly into the light. That was when I saw something that made my stomach tighten. She looked at me with a strange mixture of fear and recognition. You're Alina Brooks, she said quietly. Hearing my name made the moment even more unsettling. Yes, I replied carefully. How do you know me? The girl hesitated again. Because you're married to Michael Brooks. My chest felt suddenly heavy. The way she said my husband's name wasn't casual. It carried anger, pain, and something deeper that I couldn't immediately identify. Carlos looked at me with confusion. You know her? He asked. No, I answered honestly. I've never seen her before. I turned back toward the girl. What is your name? She swallowed nervously before answering. Sophie Carter. The name meant nothing to me at that moment, but the look in her eyes told me there was a story behind it. And something about the way she kept glancing down the hallway made me realize something else. She wasn't hiding from strangers. She was hiding from someone specific. Before I could ask another question, footsteps echoed from the far end of the hallway. Sophie reacted instantly, her entire body tensed with panic. Close it, she whispered urgently. Please close the wall. The fear in her voice was real. Carlos looked at me for instructions. In that moment, my instincts made the decision for me. Close it, I said quietly. Carlos pushed the panel back into place just seconds before Linda Harper, the office manager who had worked for my husband for nearly 20 years, walked around the corner carrying a tray with coffee cups. Mrs. Brooks, she said politely, though her voice sounded slightly strained. Your coffee is ready. I smiled calmly, pretending nothing unusual had just happened. Thank you, Linda. But while I accepted the cup from her, I noticed something important. Linda's eyes briefly moved toward the wall, just for a second. Then she quickly looked away. Most people would have missed it. But I didn't. That tiny glance told me something very important. Linda Harper knew about the hidden wall. And judging by the tension in her expression, she knew exactly what was behind it. I thanked her and returned to the waiting area near Michael's office, but my mind was moving quickly now. Something strange was happening inside that building, and it was connected to my husband. And the young woman hidden behind that wall clearly believed she was in danger. 10 minutes later, the elevator doors opened again. And out stepped Michael Brooks, my husband of 40 years. Michael looked exactly the same as he always did, confident, well-dressed, perfectly composed. When he saw me sitting there, his face immediately lit up with surprise. Alina, he said warmly as he walked toward me, what a wonderful surprise. He leaned down and kissed my cheek. To anyone watching, it would have looked like a loving reunion. But as I looked into his eyes, something inside me felt different. For the first time in decades, I found myself studying my own husband the way I used to study suspects during investigations. Carefully, quietly, looking for signs of what he might be hiding. I brought you lunch, I said, holding up the bag. I thought you might enjoy a surprise visit. He smiled politely, but I noticed something strange. When he stepped into the hallway, his eyes also moved briefly toward the wall. The exact same wall Carlos had opened minutes earlier. The exact same wall where Sophie Carter was hiding. The smile on Michael's face never changed. But something in his expression tightened for just a fraction of a second. And that tiny reaction confirmed a terrifying thought forming inside my mind. My husband knew exactly what was behind that wall. Are you all right? He asked me casually. You look like you're thinking very hard about something. I forced myself to smile gently, just enjoying the surprise. He laughed softly and guided me toward his office. But as we walked down that hallway together, I could feel the weight of something invisible pressing on my thoughts. Because now I knew 3 things for certain. First, there was a hidden corridor built inside the wall of my husband's office. Second, a frightened 19-year-old girl named Sophie Carter was hiding inside it. And third, both my husband Michael Brooks and his office manager Linda Harper clearly knew about it. But the most unsettling question had just begun to form in my mind. Why would my husband hide a young woman behind a secret wall inside his own office building? I didn't have the answer yet. But before that day ended, Sophie Carter was going to tell me something that would make the situation far more dangerous than I ever imagined. When my husband Michael Brooks led me into his office that afternoon, I carried the lunch bag in my hand and a storm of questions inside my mind. From the outside, everything looked perfectly normal. His office was exactly as it had always been: large windows overlooking the city, polished furniture, the faint smell of expensive coffee, and the quiet hum of computers in the background. But now I knew something no visitor was ever supposed to discover. Just a few steps down that hallway, behind a decorative wooden panel, there was a hidden corridor. And inside that corridor was a frightened young woman named Sophie Carter. Michael sat down behind his desk and smiled at me. "You really didn't have to bring lunch all the way here," he said warmly. "But I'm glad you did." I smiled back, doing something I hadn't done to my husband in years. I watched him carefully, every movement, every glance, every tiny reaction. It's a strange experience to suddenly examine someone you have loved for 40 years the same way you would examine a suspect during an investigation. But once suspicion enters your mind, you can't ignore it. I set the lunch bag on his desk. "I thought it would be nice," I said casually. "It's been a while since we surprised each other." He nodded, opening the bag. But as he did, his eyes moved briefly toward the hallway again. Just like earlier, just like Linda had done, toward that wall, and that small detail told me something important. Michael wasn't relaxed, he was alert, watching, making sure something remained hidden. We spent about 10 minutes talking about ordinary things: weather, work, retirement plans. To anyone listening outside the room, it would have sounded like a completely normal conversation between a husband and wife. But underneath that polite exchange, my mind was busy connecting pieces of a puzzle I didn't fully understand yet. Finally, Michael checked his watch. "I'm sorry, Alina," he said. "I have a conference call starting in a few minutes." That was perfect, because I needed time to think. "That's all right," I replied, standing up. "I should probably head home anyway." He walked me back toward the hallway with the same calm, charming smile he always wore in public. But just before I reached the elevator, I turned slightly. "Actually," I said casually, "I think I left my glasses in the waiting area." Michael paused for a second. It was a tiny pause, but I noticed it immediately. "Do you want me to grab them?" he asked. "No, that's okay," I said gently. "I'll get them." He hesitated again, then he nodded. "All right, I'll be in my office if you need anything." I waited until his office door closed. The hallway was quiet again. Linda Harper was busy on the phone near her desk. Carlos Ramirez had already returned to his maintenance duties somewhere else in the building. Slowly, I walked toward the decorative wall again. My heartbeat had started to speed up, because now I knew two things for certain. Sophie Carter was hiding in there, and she was hiding for a reason. I glanced down the hallway to make sure no one was watching. Then I gently pressed against the panel Carlos had loosened earlier. The wood shifted slightly, just enough for the narrow opening to appear again. I leaned closer and whispered quietly, "Sophie?" For a moment, nothing happened. Then I heard movement inside the hidden space. A second later, her face appeared in the narrow gap. She looked even more frightened than before. "You came back," she whispered. "Of course I did," I said softly. "You're hiding inside my husband's office wall. I think that gives me the right to ask a few questions." She studied my face carefully, like she was trying to decide if I was someone she could trust. "You shouldn't be here," she said nervously. "If Michael finds out you know about this." She stopped talking, but she didn't need to finish the sentence. I lowered my voice even further. "Why are you hiding in this building?" She hesitated again. Then she said something that made the world feel suddenly unstable beneath my feet. "Because if I leave," she whispered, "they'll kill me." My stomach tightened instantly. That was not the answer I expected. "Who will kill you?" I asked quietly. Sophie's eyes moved toward Michael's office door, then back to me. "The people your husband works for." For a few seconds I couldn't respond. Not because I believed her immediately, but because the fear in her voice sounded completely genuine. I had spent decades interviewing witnesses and suspects, and that tone, the quiet, desperate certainty in her voice, was extremely difficult to fake. "Start from the beginning," I said carefully. "Tell me why you're here." Sophie took a deep breath. 3 months ago, I started working as an intern for the company," she explained. "I was helping the finance department organize old records. My investigative instincts immediately sharpened. Finance departments are where secrets hide. And what did you find? I asked. She looked down at her hands. Something I wasn't supposed to see. I could feel my pulse beginning to rise again. What kind of something? Sophie leaned slightly closer to the opening. Illegal payments, she whispered. Millions of dollars moving through fake companies. My mind instantly shifted into the same analytical mode I used during my career. Shell companies, financial transfers, hidden transactions. I had investigated dozens of cases like that, but Sophie wasn't finished. At first I thought it was just accounting errors, she continued. But then I realized the money wasn't disappearing, it was being moved. Moved where? I asked. Sophie shook her head slowly. That's the problem, I don't know, but I know who signed the authorization. A cold feeling spread across my chest. Because I already knew what name she was about to say, Sophie looked directly at me. Michael Brooks, my husband. For a moment the hallway felt too quiet, too still. You're telling me my husband approved illegal financial transfers? I asked slowly. Sophie nodded. And he wasn't the only one involved. Who else? I asked. She leaned even closer to the opening and whispered a name that made the situation far more serious. Andrew Cole? I knew that name immediately. Andrew Cole was the company's powerful corporate lawyer, a man famous for protecting executives from scandals and lawsuits. If Andrew Cole was involved, this wasn't just suspicious accounting. This was something much bigger. When they realized I had seen the files, Sophie continued quietly, things got dangerous. What happened? I asked. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Someone tried to access my apartment in the middle of the night. My chest tightened again. That's when I came here, she said. I knew the building security systems. I found this empty space behind the wall. She looked directly into my eyes. I've been hiding here for 2 weeks. 2 weeks, inside a wall, inside my husband's office building. I felt a mixture of disbelief and dread spreading through my thoughts. But before I could ask another question, we both heard something that made Sophie instantly freeze. Footsteps, coming down the hallway, heavy, confident, familiar. Michael's office door was opening. Sophie's eyes widened with panic. Close it, she whispered urgently. Please. I pushed the panel back into place just seconds before Michael's voice echoed into the hallway. Eleanor, he called out. I turned around slowly. My husband was standing in the doorway of his office, watching me, and the expression on his face told me something had just changed. Because for the first time since I had arrived, Michael Brooks didn't look surprised to see me near that wall. He looked suspicious, and in that moment, a single terrifying thought crossed my mind. If Sophie Carter was telling the truth, then the man I had been married to for 40 years might not just be hiding a secret. He might be part of something far more dangerous than I ever imagined. When my husband Michael Brooks stepped out of his office and saw me standing near that wall, something inside the atmosphere of that hallway shifted instantly. For 40 years, I had known this man better than anyone. I knew the way he smiled when he was relaxed. I knew the way his voice sounded when he was amused, irritated, or tired, but the expression on his face in that moment was something different. Suspicion. Eleanor, he said again, stepping further into the hallway. What are you doing down here? I forced a calm smile, the same polite smile I had used hundreds of times during investigations when I didn't want a suspect to know I was studying them. I was looking for my glasses, I said lightly. I thought I left them out here. His eyes moved slowly around the hallway. For a brief moment they landed on the wall panel beside me. The exact place where Sophie Carter was hiding only a few feet away. I could almost feel my heartbeat echoing in my ears, but Michael didn't move toward the wall. Instead, he looked back at me. Did you find them? He asked. No, I replied casually. I must have left them at home. He studied my face for another second. Then the suspicion in his eyes softened and his usual confident smile returned. You always misplace those glasses, he said with a small laugh. To anyone watching, it would have looked like a perfectly ordinary conversation between a husband and wife. But I noticed something important. Michael didn't walk past the wall. Instead, he stayed positioned between me and the hallway behind him, almost like he was protecting something. Are you heading home now? He asked. Yes, I said. I didn't want to interrupt your workday too much. Never, he said smoothly. You know you're always welcome here. Then he leaned forward and kissed my cheek again, And just like that, the moment passed, or at least it appeared to pass. Michael returned to his office. I walked calmly toward the elevator, but inside my mind nothing felt calm anymore, because now I knew something I could never unknow. There was a young woman hiding behind a wall in my husband's office building. She claimed my husband was involved in illegal financial transfers, and she believed someone might kill her if she left that hiding place. The elevator doors closed in front of me. As the elevator descended toward the lobby, the calm mask I had been wearing finally cracked. My hands began to tremble slightly. I had spent decades investigating corruption in corporations. I knew how these situations usually unfolded: hidden transactions, powerful lawyers, employees who discover something they were never supposed to see, and sometimes witnesses who disappear. When I stepped outside the building, the cold afternoon air hit my face. But the fresh air didn't clear my thoughts. It made them race faster, because Sophie Carter had said something else that continued to echo in my mind. The name Andrew Cole? Andrew Cole was not just a corporate lawyer, he was a legal bulldozer, a man known for making problems disappear before they ever reached a courtroom. And if Andrew Cole was involved in whatever Sophie had discovered, then the situation was much bigger than one executive signing suspicious documents. This was organized, carefully protected, and possibly extremely dangerous. I reached my car and sat inside for several minutes without starting the engine. My instincts were telling me something important. Sophie Carter was terrified for a reason. And if her fear was justified, then leaving her hidden inside that wall was not a long-term solution. She needed help. But the question was, who could I trust? I couldn't confront Michael yet. If he was involved in what Sophie described, confronting him without proof could put her in immediate danger. I couldn't go to the company either. Andrew Cole would shut down any internal investigation before it even began. That left only one option: law enforcement, but even that required caution. I needed someone experienced in financial crimes, someone who understood corporate corruption, and someone who wouldn't immediately alert the company's legal team. That was when I thought of Detective Rachel Stone. Rachel Stone was 45 years old and one of the most respected financial crimes investigators in the city. We had crossed paths several times during my career when my investigations uncovered criminal activity that required police involvement. She was intelligent, patient, and most importantly, she understood how powerful corporations tried to hide their tracks. If anyone could quietly investigate something like this, it was Rachel. I started the engine and drove home. The entire drive, my mind replayed the conversation with Sophie over and over again. Illegal transfers, fake companies, Michael's signature, and Andrew Cole protecting everything from the legal side. But one thought kept pushing its way to the front of my mind. Why was Sophie hiding in that building instead of going to the police herself? That question stayed with me the entire evening. Later that night, around 9 p.m., Michael returned home. He looked completely relaxed, as if nothing unusual had happened during the day. "How was the rest of your afternoon?" he asked casually while hanging his coat. I watched him carefully. "Quiet," I replied. "How about yours?" "Busy as always," he said. "Meetings, calls, paperwork?" He walked into the kitchen and poured himself a drink. "I'm glad you came by the office today," he added. "It was a nice surprise." I nodded politely, but inside my mind I was analyzing every word, every expression, every subtle change in his tone. The strange thing about deception is that people who lie often behave exactly the same as they always have. They rely on familiarity to hide the truth. And Michael Brooks had always been very good at appearing calm. But that night I noticed something small. Twice during dinner, he checked his phone and walked into the other room to answer messages. That wasn't unusual by itself. But the timing felt different, almost urgent. After dinner, he sat in the living room reading financial reports on his tablet. From the outside, everything looked perfectly ordinary. But the secret behind that office wall had changed everything. Around 10 p.m., I excused myself and went upstairs to my study. Once the door was closed, I opened my phone and searched for a familiar number: Rachel Stone. I hesitated for a moment before pressing the call button, because once I made this call, there would be no going back to normal. The phone rang twice before she answered. "Rachel Stone," she said. "Rachel, it's Alina Brooks. There was a brief pause, then her voice warmed slightly. Eleanor, it's been a long time. What can I do for you? I took a slow breath before answering. I think I may have discovered something serious inside my husband's company. Another pause, this one longer. What kind of serious? She asked carefully. I looked out the window into the dark night before answering. The kind that involves hidden financial transfers, corporate lawyers, and a terrified 19-year-old girl hiding behind a wall inside an office building. The silence on the line lasted several seconds. Then Rachel spoke again, her tone completely different now. Focused, professional. Eleanor, she said quietly, start from the beginning. So I did. I told her everything. About the hidden corridor, about Sophie Carter. About the suspicious transactions. And about the name Andrew Cole. When I finished speaking, Rachel exhaled slowly. That's a lot, she said. Do you believe the girl? I thought back to Sophie's frightened eyes in that dark corridor. Yes, I answered firmly. I do. Rachel was silent for another moment. Then she said something that made the situation even more serious than I expected. Eleanor, if what you're describing is real, this isn't just financial fraud. My grip on the phone tightened slightly. What do you mean? Rachel's voice lowered. I've seen cases like this before. When large amounts of money move through shell companies, it's often connected to something much bigger. Bigger how? I asked. Her answer came slowly, carefully. Money laundering, corporate bribery, sometimes even international crime networks. A cold chill ran through my body, but Rachel wasn't finished. And if that girl is hiding instead of coming forward, she added quietly, there's a good chance someone has already tried to silence her. My heart began to beat faster again. Because that meant Sophie Carter wasn't just a witness, she was a target. Rachel's voice became firm again. Do not confront your husband, she said. Not yet. I wasn't planning to, I replied. Good, she said. Because if this is what I think it is, we need evidence before anyone makes a move. I looked down at the floor, thinking about the narrow corridor behind that wall, thinking about the frightened girl hiding inside it. Rachel, I said quietly, there's something else you should know. What is it? She asked. I hesitated for just a second. Then I said the one detail Sophie had revealed that changed the entire situation. Sophie Carter says she didn't come to the police because she believes someone inside the company has already been watching her. Rachel's voice turned very serious. Watching her how? I swallowed slowly before answering. She thinks they know she's still inside the building. There was another long silence. Then Rachel said something that made my stomach drop. Eleanor, if that's true, then whoever is behind this might already know you spoke to her today. And suddenly, the quiet house around me didn't feel quite as safe as it had an hour earlier. After my phone call with Detective Rachel Stone that night, sleep became impossible. I lay in bed beside my husband Michael Brooks, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing in the dark room, and for the first time in 40 years, I felt like I was lying next to a stranger. Rachel's warning echoed in my mind again and again. If Sophie believes someone is watching her, then whoever is behind this might already know you spoke to her. That thought changed everything. It meant the situation inside that office building might already be escalating. And if Sophie Carter was truly in danger, waiting too long could be a terrible mistake. By morning, I had already made a decision. I needed to speak to Sophie again, but this time I needed to learn the entire truth. The next day, Michael left early for work as usual. He kissed me goodbye casually, just like every other morning. I have a long day of meetings, he said. Don't wait up for dinner tonight. His tone was normal, calm, familiar, but now every word sounded different to me. Because somewhere inside his office building, hidden behind a wall, there was a young woman who claimed my husband might be involved in something dangerous. After he left, I waited 30 minutes before getting into my car. I drove back to the office building downtown, keeping my thoughts steady the way I had learned to do during investigations. The key to uncovering the truth was patience. Rushing into a situation without information could destroy the only chance to expose it properly. When I arrived at the building, the same security guard greeted me politely. Back again, Mrs. Brooks, he said with a smile. I returned the smile calmly. I forgot something yesterday, I replied. He nodded without suspicion and allowed me upstairs. When the elevator doors opened on the executive floor, the hallway looked almost exactly the same as it had the previous afternoon. Quiet, professional, normal, But now I knew that appearance was a lie. Linda Harper, the office manager who had worked with Michael for nearly 20 years, was sitting at her desk reviewing paperwork. When she saw me, her expression immediately tightened, just slightly, but enough for me to notice. "Mrs. Brooks," she said carefully, "is Michael expecting you today?" "No," I replied pleasantly. "I just needed to grab something from his office." Linda nodded slowly, but I could tell she was watching me more closely now. That told me something important. She was nervous, which meant she probably knew more about the hidden wall than she was willing to admit. I walked down the hallway toward Michael's office, but instead of entering the room, I continued walking until I reached the panel again. My pulse began to rise slightly. I glanced back toward Linda's desk. She was now speaking quietly on the phone. That gave me the moment I needed. I gently pressed against the panel again. The wood shifted just like before. The narrow opening appeared, and almost immediately Sophie Carter's face appeared in the darkness. She looked exhausted and far more anxious than the day before. "You came back," she whispered quickly. "Of course I did," I said quietly. "You told me something serious yesterday. I need to understand exactly what you discovered." Sophie looked down the hallway nervously before speaking again. "Did you tell anyone?" she asked. "Yes," I answered honestly. "A financial crimes investigator I trust." Sophie's eyes widened slightly. "Police? Not yet," I said carefully, "but someone who knows how to investigate cases like this." She nodded slowly, but the fear in her expression didn't disappear. "That might make things worse," she said. "Why?" I asked. Sophie hesitated for a moment before answering. "Because the problem isn't just your husband." My stomach tightened slightly. "Then who else is involved?" Sophie took a slow breath. "Andrew Cole, the name again, the powerful corporate lawyer. You mentioned him yesterday," I said, "but I need more details." Sophie leaned closer so her voice stayed low. "The company isn't just moving money through fake accounts," she explained. "It's laundering it." That word landed heavily in the air between us. "For who?" I asked quietly. Sophie shook her head slightly. "I don't know exactly. But I saw the transaction codes. Some of the payments were coming from overseas." My investigative instincts immediately recognized the pattern: international money transfers hidden through shell corporations. That wasn't just corporate fraud, that was organized financial crime. "And Michael approved these transfers?" I asked. Sophie nodded. "His digital signature was on the authorization documents." For a moment I felt something deep inside my chest tighten. Hearing the accusation again didn't make it easier to process, but I kept my voice steady. "How did you find these records?" I asked. "When I started working as an intern, I was assigned to archive old financial files," Sophie explained. "Most of them were harmless, but then I found a folder that wasn't supposed to be in the internal system." "Hidden records," I said. Sophie nodded. "Millions of dollars moving through temporary companies. Some of them existed for only a few weeks before disappearing." I could feel the pattern forming clearly now. Shell corporations created solely to move money and disappear before anyone could trace them. "And Andrew Cole protected the legal side of it," I said quietly. "Exactly," Sophie replied. "Every time the company's auditors raised questions, Andrew Cole handled the response." The more she spoke, the clearer the situation became. This wasn't an accident, this was a carefully designed system. But one question still bothered me. "If you found all this information," I said slowly, "why didn't you go to the authorities immediately?" Sophie looked down at the floor of the narrow corridor. For a moment she didn't answer, then she said something that made the situation even more complicated. "Because Michael already knew I existed." I blinked in surprise. "What do you mean?" Sophie looked up at me, her eyes filled with a complicated mixture of fear and sadness. "Michael Brooks isn't just your husband," she said quietly. "He's also my father." For a moment I couldn't speak. The hallway seemed to spin slightly around me. "Your father?" I repeated slowly. Sophie nodded. "My mother had a relationship with him years before he married you," she explained. "But he never acknowledged me publicly." The words felt like they were falling into place around me one by one. A secret child, hidden history, a young woman working inside the company without revealing her identity. "So you applied for the internship to investigate him?" I asked. Sophie nodded again. "My mother died last year," she said quietly. "Before she passed away, she told me everything." My chest tightened again. She told you Michael was your father? Yes, Sophie replied. And she also told me something else. What? I asked. Sophie looked directly into my eyes. She said he was involved in something dangerous. The silence between us felt heavy. Suddenly, everything made more sense. Sophie hadn't just been an intern who accidentally discovered financial fraud. She had come into that building looking for the truth about the man who had abandoned her. And she had discovered something far worse than she expected. When I started investigating the files, Sophie continued, someone noticed. Your husband? I asked quietly. She shook her head. Not at first. Her voice dropped even lower. It was Andrew Cole. My pulse quickened. What did he do? Sophie swallowed nervously before answering. He confronted me in the office one evening after everyone else had left. The fear in her eyes returned as she remembered. He told me I was looking at files that didn't belong to me. What did you say? I asked. Nothing, she replied. But the next day, my apartment was broken into. A cold chill ran through my body. Did they take anything? Sophie shook her head slowly. No, I frowned. Then why break in? Sophie looked at me with a haunted expression. Because they wanted me to know they could reach me. My heart pounded harder. That's when you came back here, I said. Yes, she whispered. I knew about this hidden corridor from the building plans. She looked around the dark space behind the wall. It was the only place I could hide. For 2 weeks she had been living inside a secret space inside the building, waiting, watching, trying to survive long enough to expose the truth. But before I could say anything else, as Sophie suddenly froze, her eyes widened. Someone's coming, she whispered. I turned my head quickly, and then I heard it too, footsteps, not just one person this time. 2 voices approaching from the far end of the hallway. One voice I recognized immediately. Michael Brooks. The other voice made my stomach drop. Andrew Cole. Sophie's expression filled with panic. If he sees you talking to me, she whispered urgently, everything will fall apart. I quickly pushed the panel closed again, just seconds before Michael and Andrew Cole turned the corner into the hallway. And when Andrew Cole's eyes landed directly on me standing near that wall, the cold smile that slowly appeared on his face told me something terrifying. He already suspected something was wrong. When Andrew Cole's eyes landed on me standing beside that wall, I felt a quiet wave of cold awareness move through my body. Not fear exactly, but the sharp instinct that something dangerous had just shifted. Andrew Cole was a man who built his reputation protecting powerful people from scandals. He had spent decades cleaning up corporate disasters before the public ever heard about them, and men like that develop a very particular skill. They notice things, small things, unusual things, and at that moment he was noticing me. Mrs. Brooks, Andrew Cole said smoothly as he approached. His voice was polite, but there was something sharp hidden beneath it. I didn't expect to see you here again today. Michael Brooks, my husband, stood beside him looking equally surprised. Eleanor, Michael said, I thought you went home yesterday. I forced a calm smile, the same professional mask I had used countless times during my career when people were studying my reactions. I forgot something in Michael's office, I replied lightly. Andrew Cole tilted his head slightly. His eyes moved from my face to the wall behind me and then back again. That tiny glance told me something very important. He knew the wall existed. But unlike Michael, Andrew didn't look nervous about it. He looked curious. Curious people are dangerous investigators, but curious lawyers are even more dangerous. Did you find what you were looking for? Andrew asked calmly. Yes, I said, just some paperwork. Michael stepped forward and gently placed a hand on my shoulder. You should have called me, he said. I could have helped. His tone sounded warm and concerned, but I noticed the subtle tension in his voice. He was watching Andrew Cole just as carefully as Andrew was watching me. That told me something else. Whatever was happening inside that company, even the people involved in it didn't fully trust each other. I didn't want to interrupt your meetings, I said. Andrew's faint smile returned. You're never an interruption, Mrs. Brooks, he said politely. But his eyes lingered on the wall again, for just half a second longer than necessary. And that tiny detail made my instincts scream a warning. Because Andrew Cole was not the type of man who overlooked unusual behavior. He studied it, analyzed it, and then quietly removed whatever threat it represented. Michael, Andrew said casually, we should review the compliance documents before the board call. Michael nodded immediately. Right. Then he turned back to me. Are you heading home now? He asked. I could feel Andrew's attention fixed on my answer. Yes, I said calmly. I just wanted to stop by quickly. Michael walked me toward the elevator again, leaving Andrew Cole standing behind us in the hallway. But even as we walked away, I could feel Andrew's eyes on my back, watching, calculating. When the elevator doors finally closed, I let out a slow breath, because something about that encounter had confirmed a terrible possibility. Andrew Cole suspected something, maybe not everything, but enough to make him pay attention. And if he started investigating inside that building, it wouldn't take long before he discovered Sophie Carter hiding behind that wall. That meant Sophie was now in even greater danger. I stepped outside the building and immediately called Rachel Stone. She answered on the second ring. Rachel Stone. Rachel, it's Alina, I said quickly. Her tone changed instantly. What happened? I explained everything, Andrew Cole's arrival, his reaction, the way he had looked at the wall. When I finished speaking, Rachel was quiet for several seconds. That's not good, she said finally. What do you mean? I asked. Andrew Cole is extremely careful, Rachel explained. If he suspects even a small problem, he will start digging. My grip tightened on the phone. And if he starts digging, he'll find Sophie. Exactly, Rachel said. Which means we don't have as much time as we thought. I looked back up at the tall office building. Somewhere behind those glass windows, Sophie Carter was still hiding inside a narrow corridor. What do we do? I asked. Rachel's voice became focused and professional. First, we need evidence, she said. Without proof, this turns into a corporate dispute instead of a criminal case. Sophie already saw the financial records, I said. But she doesn't have copies. Then we need those records, Rachel replied. I knew exactly what that meant. You want me to go back into the building? You're the only person who can do it without raising suspicion, Rachel said. For now, I thought about Michael, about the man I had trusted for 4 decades, about the possibility that he might be part of something deeply illegal. There's another problem, I said quietly. What? Rachel asked. Sophie told me something else today. I took a slow breath before saying it. Michael Brooks is her father. There was a long silence on the line, then Rachel said quietly, that complicates things. Yes, I replied softly. It does, because now this situation wasn't just about corporate crime anymore. It was about family, secrets, and a man who had hidden an entire part of his life from me for decades. Rachel spoke again. Listen carefully, she said. Do not confront Michael, not yet. I wasn't planning to, I replied. Good, she said, because if he realizes Sophie is still alive and hiding in that building, he might panic. Panic. That word hung heavily in my mind, because people who panic often make dangerous decisions. What about Sophie? I asked. Rachel hesitated before answering. She can't stay there much longer. I already knew that. The moment Andrew Cole started asking questions, the hidden corridor would be discovered. Can we get her out? I asked. Rachel sighed. Maybe, but if we move her too early, we lose our chance to catch everyone involved. That was the difficult part of investigations. Timing, move too slowly and someone gets hurt, move too quickly and the evidence disappears. We need proof of the financial transfers, Rachel continued. Documents, emails. Anything linking Michael Brooks and Andrew Cole to the shell companies. I looked back at the office building again. Those records will be inside the company servers. Exactly, Rachel said. And someone inside that building will have access to them. At first I thought she meant Michael. But then another name entered my mind. Linda Harper, the office manager, the woman who had watched the wall nervously yesterday. The woman who clearly knew something about what was happening. Rachel, I said slowly, there might be someone else who knows about this. Who? She asked. Linda Harper, I replied. Rachel paused. The office manager? Yes, I said. She's been there almost 20 years. Rachel's voice became thoughtful. People in those positions often see everything. Exactly, I said, but the question is whether she's part of the problem or part of the solution. Rachel's answer was simple. There's only one way to find out. I understood immediately what she meant. I would have to talk to Linda Harper, but that conversation could go in 2 very different directions. If Linda was involved in covering up the fraud, confronting her could alert Andrew Cole immediately. But if Linda had been quietly watching everything for years, she might hold the key to exposing the entire operation. Rachel's final words before ending the call echoed in my mind. "Be careful, Alina," she said. "People involved in financial crimes at that level don't like loose ends." Loose ends. The phrase stayed with me as I drove home that afternoon, because Sophie Carter wasn't just a witness anymore. She was a secret hidden behind a wall in a corporate building. And if Andrew Cole decided she was a loose end, he would remove that problem without hesitation, which meant the next move had to be very careful, because somewhere inside that office building, someone had already started watching. The next morning, I woke up with one clear thought repeating in my mind. If Sophie Carter was going to survive this situation, I needed an ally inside that building. Detective Rachel Stone had been right about one thing. Evidence was the key. Without documents proving the illegal transfers, everything Sophie had told me would sound like accusations without proof. And powerful people know exactly how to destroy accusations that lack evidence. But there was someone inside Michael's office who might already know the truth. Linda Harper. Linda had worked as the office manager for nearly 20 years. She managed schedules, paperwork, financial requests, and internal communication. In other words, if something suspicious had been happening inside that company for years, Linda would almost certainly have seen pieces of it. The question was whether she had been helping hide it or quietly watching it. That difference could change everything. By mid-morning, I was back in my car driving toward the office building again. I kept my movements calm and predictable, exactly the way someone in my position would behave. A wife visiting her husband's workplace was not unusual. Suspicion only grows when behavior suddenly becomes secretive. When I arrived at the building lobby, the same security guard greeted me again. "Mrs. Brooks," he said with a polite smile, "you're becoming a regular visitor." I smiled back casually. "I guess retirement has made me curious about my husband's workplace." He laughed politely and waved me through. When the elevator doors opened on the executive floor, I immediately noticed something different. The hallway felt quieter, not just quiet from lack of noise, quiet in the way a room feels when people are watching something carefully. Linda Harper sat at her desk again, but this time she looked tired. Her eyes lifted toward me slowly as I approached. "Mrs. Brooks," she said carefully, "Michael didn't mention you were coming today." Her voice sounded polite, but there was tension beneath it. I leaned against the edge of her desk and spoke softly. "Actually, Linda, I came to see you." That sentence caught her completely off guard, her eyebrows lifted slightly. "Me?" she asked. I nodded. "Yes." For a moment neither of us spoke. Then Linda looked down the hallway to make sure no one else was nearby. When she looked back at me, something had changed in her expression. The polite office smile was gone. In its place was something much more serious. "Mrs. Brooks," she said quietly, "this is not a good place for certain conversations." That sentence confirmed something important immediately. Linda already knew the type of conversation I wanted to have. "Where would be better?" I asked. Linda hesitated before answering, then she said something unexpected. "Follow me." She stood up from her desk and walked toward the far end of the hallway. Not toward Michael's office, toward a small conference room near the back corner of the executive floor. She opened the door and stepped inside. I followed her quietly. Once the door closed, Linda turned toward me with a long exhale. "How much do you know?" she asked. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I watched her carefully. The nervous tension in her face told me everything I needed to know. Linda Harper had been carrying a secret for a long time. "I know about the hidden corridor behind the wall," I said calmly. Her eyes widened slightly. "And," she asked carefully, "and I know there's a girl hiding inside it," I continued. Linda slowly lowered herself into one of the chairs at the conference table. "Sophie," she whispered. Hearing the girl's name confirmed it completely. Linda already knew she was there. "Yes," I said. "Sophie Carter?" Linda closed her eyes briefly and rubbed her temples like someone who had been expecting this moment for a long time. "I was hoping it wouldn't come to this," she said quietly. My pulse quickened slightly. "You knew she was hiding there?" Linda nodded slowly. "Carlos told me someone had opened the wall panel yesterday," she explained. "He didn't know what he had found, but I suspected." I leaned forward slightly. "Why didn't you report it?" Linda gave a bitter smile. Because I already know what happens to people who report things in this company. The weight of those words hung in the room. Linda, I said carefully, how long have you known about the illegal financial transfers? Her reaction told me everything. She didn't look surprised, she looked exhausted. Years, she answered quietly. That single word sent a chill through me. Years, I repeated. Linda nodded slowly. At first it looked like normal corporate restructuring, she explained. Shell companies are common in large organizations. She paused before continuing. But after a while, the patterns didn't make sense anymore. My investigative instincts immediately focused. What kind of patterns? Linda leaned closer across the table. Millions of dollars moving through companies that existed for only a few months, she said. International accounts, offshore banking. Exactly what Sophie had described. And Michael approved these transfers? I asked. Linda hesitated. Yes, hearing the confirmation from someone else made the reality even heavier. And Andrew Cole? I asked. Linda gave a dry laugh. Andrew Cole built the entire legal structure for it. So Sophie had been telling the truth. Why didn't you report it? I asked. Linda looked directly into my eyes. Because 2 years ago someone else tried. The room suddenly felt colder. What happened? I asked quietly. Linda's voice dropped almost to a whisper. He disappeared. My heart pounded once hard. Who? Linda shook her head slowly. An accountant named Daniel Mercer, she said. He worked in the compliance department. Compliance, my former field. He started asking questions about the transfers, Linda continued. 2 weeks later, he resigned suddenly and moved out of the city. She paused before adding quietly, no one has heard from him since. The silence in the room grew heavy. Because that meant something much darker than financial fraud might be happening. And Sophie? I asked. Linda exhaled slowly. I didn't know who she was at first, she admitted. But I knew she had been looking at files she shouldn't see. That matched Sophie's story perfectly. When I realized Andrew Cole had started watching her, Linda said quietly, I tried to warn her. I blinked in surprise. You warned her? Linda nodded. That's when she disappeared. Disappeared or hid inside the wall. Linda leaned forward again. Mrs. Brooks, you need to understand something. What? I asked. Linda's eyes were full of urgency now. Andrew Cole is not just covering up financial fraud. A cold chill ran down my spine. What do you mean? I asked. Linda looked toward the closed conference room door before answering. The money being moved through those accounts, she lowered her voice even further. It's connected to people outside the company. What kind of people? I asked. Linda's answer came slowly, carefully. The kind of people powerful corporations don't say no to. That sentence made the situation far more dangerous than I had imagined. Because it meant the money laundering wasn't just internal corruption. It might be connected to organized criminal networks. And if that was true, then Sophie Carter hadn't just discovered financial fraud. She had discovered something that powerful people would do anything to keep hidden. But before I could ask another question, Linda suddenly froze. Her eyes shifted toward the conference room door. Footsteps were approaching in the hallway. Slow, confident, deliberate. Linda's face turned pale. Oh no, she whispered. What? I asked. But before she could answer, the conference room door handle began to turn, and the voice that followed made the blood in my veins run cold. Mrs. Brooks, Andrew Cole said calmly as the door opened. I was hoping we might have a chance to talk. When Andrew Cole stepped into that conference room, I knew the quiet investigation I had been building was over. This was the moment everything would either collapse or finally come into the light. Andrew Cole closed the door slowly behind him. His movements were calm, controlled, almost polite, but his eyes were sharp, observant, dangerous. Linda Harper, who had been the office manager in my husband Michael Brooks's company for almost 20 years, looked like someone who had just been caught standing too close to the edge of a cliff. She didn't say a word. Andrew placed both hands lightly on the conference table and looked directly at me. Mrs. Brooks, he said calmly, it's unusual to see you visiting the office so frequently. His tone was polite, but the meaning underneath it was clear. He was asking a question without asking it. Why are you here? I leaned back slightly in my chair and met his gaze. Years of investigating corporate corruption had taught me something very important. People like Andrew Cole feed on fear. If you show it, they control the conversation immediately. Retirement leaves a person curious, I said calmly, and curiosity has always been part of my personality. Andrew gave a thin smile. Yes, he said. I'm aware of your career history. That sentence carried weight. He knew exactly who I had been before retirement. A financial compliance investigator. Someone trained to detect the exact type of crime he was hiding. Andrew's eyes moved briefly toward Linda Harper. Linda, he said smoothly, why don't you give Mrs. Brooks and me a few minutes to talk privately? Linda hesitated. I could see the fear in her face. But she stood slowly and walked toward the door without arguing. As she passed Andrew, their eyes met for a brief moment. Something silent passed between them, a warning. When the door closed again, Andrew pulled out a chair and sat down across from me. The room felt suddenly very small. You've been asking a lot of questions, he said calmly. Questions are healthy, I replied. They help people understand complicated situations. Andrew leaned back in his chair. Sometimes, he said quietly, questions create problems that didn't previously exist. There it was, not a threat exactly, but very close to one. I folded my hands calmly on the table. I believe problems already existed, I said. I'm just discovering them. Andrew studied my face carefully for several seconds. Then he said something that made the entire situation shift. The girl behind the wall, he said softly. My heart didn't skip a beat, but inside my mind, every alarm bell started ringing. He knew. Sophie Carter, Andrew continued. The room felt colder, but I kept my expression calm. Yes, I said. Andrew nodded slowly. You found her faster than I expected. Faster than he expected. That meant he had been searching for her. Why is she hiding in your building? I asked quietly. Andrew smiled faintly. She isn't hiding, he said. She's interfering. The way he said that word made it sound almost irritating, like Sophie was a small inconvenience instead of a terrified 19-year-old girl. She discovered financial transfers, I said. Andrew shrugged slightly. Large companies move money in complicated ways. Through shell corporations? I asked. His smile widened slightly. You've always been very observant, Mrs. Brooks. The silence between us thickened. Finally, I leaned forward slightly. What are you laundering money for? I asked. Andrew didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at the window where the skyline stretched across the afternoon sky. Then he turned back toward me. You already know enough to make this conversation dangerous, he said calmly. That was the closest thing to a confession I needed, but Andrew wasn't finished. The world runs on money, he continued. Governments, corporations, industries. He leaned forward slightly. And sometimes money needs to move quietly. I understood the meaning behind his words. The company wasn't just laundering money, it was helping powerful people hide it. And Sophie discovered the system, I said. Andrew nodded. Yes, his tone was almost annoyed. Very inconvenient. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then I asked the question that had been sitting in my mind since Sophie told me the truth. Does Michael know she's his daughter? Andrew watched me carefully. He knows now, he said. The weight of those words settled heavily in my chest. Michael had learned the truth, and he hadn't come to help her. And what did he decide to do about it? I asked quietly. Andrew's smile faded slightly. Michael Brooks has always been practical. Practical, the word made my stomach turn. He chose the company, Andrew added. That sentence confirmed the worst possibility. My husband had chosen money over his own daughter. I stood slowly from my chair. This conversation is over. Andrew didn't try to stop me. But he said one more thing before I reached the door. Mrs. Brooks, he said calmly. I turned slightly. His expression was completely serious now. Some discoveries create consequences, he said. Be careful what you do next. I left the conference room without responding. My heart was racing now, but my mind was clearer than it had been in days. Andrew Cole had confirmed everything, the illegal transfers, the money laundering, and Michael's involvement. But Andrew had made one mistake. He assumed I would leave quietly. He didn't know that while he had been talking, Detective Rachel Stone had already begun moving. 2 hours later, the office building looked very different. Police vehicles filled the street outside. Federal investigators moved through the lobby with sealed warrants. Detective Rachel Stone walked beside me as we entered the building together. The financial records Linda provided were enough, Rachel said quietly. The warrants were approved immediately. Employees inside the building stared as investigators began securing offices and computers. Rachel turned to me. "Where is Sophie?" she asked. I walked toward the hallway where the hidden wall waited. Carlos Ramirez, the maintenance supervisor who had first helped me discover the corridor, was already standing nearby. He looked both shocked and relieved. I pressed the wall panel again. The wood shifted open. Sophie Carter stepped out slowly into the hallway. Her eyes widened when she saw the police officers. Rachel stepped forward gently. "Sophie Carter?" Sophie nodded nervously. Rachel showed her badge. "Detective Rachel Stone, you're safe now." Sophie looked at me, and for the first time since I had met her, the fear in her eyes began to fade. Down the hallway, I saw two investigators escorting Michael Brooks out of his office. He looked stunned, confused. When his eyes met mine, something complicated passed between us. 40 years of marriage ending in one silent moment. He didn't say anything, and neither did I, because some betrayals are too large for words. Andrew Cole was taken out of the building in handcuffs minutes later. His calm expression had finally cracked. The investigation that followed lasted months. The company's financial network connected to multiple international accounts used by criminal organizations. Shell corporations, offshore transfers, millions of dollars hidden across the world. Michael Brooks eventually cooperated with investigators in exchange for a reduced sentence. Andrew Cole did not. He was convicted of conspiracy, financial fraud, and organized money laundering. As for Sophie Carter, she didn't disappear anymore. She testified in court. She finished her university degree and slowly began rebuilding a life that had almost been erased. One afternoon months later, she came to visit me. We sat together on the porch of my house in the quiet sunlight. "I never expected you to help me," Sophie said softly. I looked at her and smiled gently. "Sometimes the truth chooses strange ways to reveal itself," I said. She glanced at me curiously. "Do you regret discovering that wall?" I thought about that question for a long moment. About Michael, about the secrets hidden inside our marriage, about the truth that had changed everything. Then I shook my head slowly. "No," I said, "because sometimes the most important discoveries in life are the ones we never expected to find. And if there is one lesson I learned from the day I surprised my husband at his office, it is this. The most dangerous secrets are not always hidden in dark places. Sometimes they are built quietly into the walls around us."